perhaps shouldn't fix the problems of aging because they might be there for a reason. Like I think it's the common thing is that maybe that's what prevents us from getting cancer more or something like that. I'm sorry, I'm not a trained biologist, so I'm not exactly sure of the ins and outs. But do you think
Okay.
of them?
Do you want a microphone? Okay. Do a quick answer, and then we'll take a few questions at the back. Aubrey, tackle that one quickly.
Alright, yeah, sure. Okay, so first of all, there is an outdated idea that aging is genuinely programmed, that we have aging for evolutionary reasons. Which we are pretty much absolutely sure that's not true anymore, because we just don't have enough organisms out there that are living long enough and avoiding predation and starvation and so on long enough to show much pathology of aging. The particular thing that you mentioned, though, is a little bit more interesting, the idea that aging somehow is a cancer defense mechanism. And I think that's true if one states it a little bit more differently. If one says aging is a trade-off between some aspects of degeneration and some aspects of cancer. Cancer is a sort of, the need to defend against cancer does manifest itself as a bunch of the degenerative changes we see in aging. However, what that means is simply we've got to fix both of those things. It's certainly an explanation for why the spectrum of phenomena in aging is as it is, but it doesn't really say anything about the practicality of fixing it.
Okay.
Yeah, I would like to say thank you for 3 absolutely great talks. And I have a question for Mr. de Grey as well. Namely, I'm not really completely familiar with your publications so far, so I'm a bit skeptical when I see concrete numbers, especially if the numbers are in a range of, the lifespan of my lifespan, like 30 years or 42 years. And I would like to know more about how you obtain these numbers, about your estimate of the probability that they are actually true, and about whether you would say that the fact that those numbers lie within your lifespan as well kind of influence your estimate in some way.
Okay, so it's a question for Aubrey again. Sorry, folks. We see with medical devices that they're very expensive in the West, but now innovation, the movement of frugal innovation, India, China, is essentially making the same device 10 times cheaper. Now, if the regulatory systems in the West prove to be as broken as they have been for the last 20 years and can't be fixed, where would you plan to decamp to, and where should we follow?
And one last question that was in the middle of the road, middle there. Okay, I'm 42 years old, sort of middle class. I'm 42 years old, sort of middle class, and relatively good health. What would be my chances of, firstly, not dying of aging, and secondly, what would be my chances of going into space myself? Presumably, if I don't die of aging, it becomes certain. If I do, well, yes. Okay. Well, actually, Richard, do you want to have a shot about the space flight one first?
Okay. In terms of going to space at your age, probably give it 10 years or so, and the costs will have come down dramatically in terms of suborbital. In terms of orbital, we're probably looking about 10-15 years before people are going to go on a large scale and for the costs to come down in a big way. But certainly, yeah, it's going to happen. A lot of people still don't think it will, but a lot of those people aren't actually working with the technologies, and they've not seen the light yet. So,
what's the price of the Virgin Galactic thing?
I think the lowest price I've seen is around about $100,000. But the problem with that's just suborbital. The orbital prices for the guys who've gone up there to stay up there for 10 days or so, it's around about 20 million at the moment. But our plan is with the space plan to get that down massively, obviously, in order to take a chief science officer and so on, we see.
Aubrey,
Yeah.
Whichever one is.
Let's do that same one first. Alright, so you want to know what your chances are. Well, of course, the spectrum of possibilities for what will happen over the next 40 or 50 years until you would be on schedule to die is very broad. And in fact, I got sort of combine my answer to your question with my answer to the first question. I think that I have come up with the estimate of about 25 years for the 50-50 chance of achieving a decisive level of progress in these technologies for what I've called robust human rejuvenation, simply by looking at the details of how much we already know, how much has to be done, and looking at the sort of time that it typically takes to do things that feel to be about that hard. So it is very much a subjective measure. And one thing I often mention, by way of underlining how subjective it is I point out that the variance on that number is very high. I would certainly say that there's at least a 10% chance that we won't get to robust human rejuvenation for 100 years. So, you know, if we hit a lot of things that we haven't come across yet. So that's really, you know, these are very soft numbers really, and that's why I always talk about the fact that what matters is simply to bring that number down as fast as possible, to just work to, you know, it doesn't matter which 100,000 lives we save by bringing forward the defeat of aging by a day, as long as we bring it forward by as many days as possible. But the short answer is, you know, around 50%, clearly, you know, I don't know, something like that. Absolutely, yeah. It really is a big deal. But to answer the third question, in my view, it's not actually about where we would go to if we can't fix the regulatory regime. I think it's more a case of making sure that we maximise our use of the variety of regulatory regimes that currently exist as soon as possible to actually get a head start on the development, especially the clinical development of those aspects of regeneration therapies that are already in a position to be experimentally tested in the clinic.
Actually, I've got a question I want to ask the panel, which is about the interface between all of this and politics. You know, we say, for example, in the UK, we've got a government which is focused on happiness, among other things. We're coming back to Pieter, what you're saying is we might have to deal with the sort of the unhappiness and misery of choice as part and parcel, which sort of would work against that. And then, obviously, from the space side of things, there's a heavy impetus from government. I mean, do you try to steer away from, you know, Richard, you try to steer away from influencing policy and try to keep it in the private sector, or do you try to influence politicians? And similarly, Aubrey, I mean, you know, presumably what you do is to intersect with the politics at some point. So,
yeah, okay, I'll start. So, I think that the best scenario, the ideal scenario, would be that we would have government enthusiasm and support for sticking substantial sums of money into all of these various visionary technologies. However, the fact is, overwhelmingly, in every country that's a democracy anyway, public policy follows public opinion rather than leading it. So the only way that's going to happen is if we can change public opinion. And that's a very slow, that's a very tall order. So my personal belief is that for the foreseeable future we will continue to see these visionary technologies being driven forward by wealthy individuals rather than by governments.
I'm generally kept away from politicians because I'm a little bit too undiplomatic. That's why they keep me in the bunker testing rocket engines. But as I understand it, there's interest. But beyond that, I wouldn't hold my breath. As Aubrey says, there's generally a lot of interest from wealthy individuals. Although rather contentiously, if a wealthy individual came to me and said, right, here's lots of money, what should I spend it on, space or SENS? I'd say spend most of it on SENS. I think it's far more useful. But the advantage of spending some money on space is it's a cosmic insurance policy, because at some point we will get smacked by a large rock, and having a multi-planet species makes a lot of sense. But yeah, it's generally private investment is what we're looking at, and we believe the technology is sufficiently interesting that people will be interested in investing.
Well, the way the question was framed there about where should we move is, I think, a problem in itself for the transhumanist movement, because it has a very insular nature in the fact that a lot of people I talk to and texts I've read, for instance, William Sims Bainbridge has actually written a whole text expanding on the notion that, of course, people will hate us, they will fight us, and we, of course, must gain some kind of land for ourselves and have a sovereign transhuman state. Well, the strange thing is, though, it seems to me that some transhumanists are just too greedy to start thinking about this dichotomic situation. They just actually want to not have to engage with others, just do their own thing. And that's very, very problematic for public policy. And I think transhumanists should engage, well, they should start to listen to some real objections that really hold sway, as I imagine I may have presented some. It really will not just be this happy G-Ways picnic. It will involve real deep, emotional, dramatic events. And a lot of people will lag behind and things like that. And there should be a genuine concern for the non-transhumanists among transhumanists. And if the movement stays so insular, I believe they're in a sense digging their own grave.
Okay, I'll take some more questions. I'll Richard, you have one and then Ajit. David, you got one on the phone, back.
Yeah.
I've got a question back. Okay.
Yeah.
Question there, then Rachel.
My question is also about politics and the attitude of public opinion about aging. So there are actually two questions. The first question is almost technical. There was finishing yesterday a consultation on European Innovation Partnership on active and healthy aging. I know that a lot of people are not certainly here are not enthusiastic about European proposals, but still, do you know, Aubrey, about proposals coming from life extensionists, I would say? And the second question is about how to convince left-wing people, and more largely, people who think that equality is important, that life extension is going to be for most people and not for a few. Personally, I'm pretty optimistic because once there will be a solution to live really longer, social question will be enormous, and because the economy of scales of methods potentially for 7 billion people, they will be also very big. So there is no big problem of money, but still the question is about biological patterns and so on. What are your proposals to be sure that it's going to be useful for everybody and not for a few?
Thank you.